Hello and welcome to Axumawian Media. My name is Melat Habtu and I'll be hosting Inside Tigray, a show that will give you a Tigrayan perspective on global, continental and statewide affairs. Please tune in, listen, engage and participate for an insightful and constructive discussion.
As a follow-up, we saw what happened after Pretoria, and now we see Abiy and the Ethiopian federal government go into talks with OLA. They've had talks in Tanzania, the first round of talks. Not much came out of the talks, not an agreement per se, but they've agreed to speak more. Do you have any insights on what the demands are of the OLA and what the demands are of the Ethiopian federal government? And can you see an agreement come out like we saw in Pretoria between the TPLF and Ethiopia?
Yeah, Abiy went into these talks mainly because of international pressure. Otherwise, he's not a good peace partner for peace. He's not interested in peace with Oromo Liberation Army. He has this plan to eliminate them, and he thinks he can still. And he's moving the Western Division of the Western Division of the Ethiopian National Defense Force from Amhara region to Oromia to conquer Wallagga. And they are now on standby in Metekel, right on the border between Benishangul Gumuz and Oromia region. He has also created a sixth division, a division that didn't exist so far, which is also basically deployed in Oromia. And in his calculation, he says he's going to have a 1 million strong national army at this point in time. And once he does that, in fact, the recent plan inside the regime, the discussion inside the regime is that for every OLA soldier, we will dedicate 10 soldiers as a sacrifice and we'll hunt them down and finish them off. So if they are 100,000, we will demobilize 1 million. If they are 10,000, we'll mobilize 100,000, and we will overpower them, we'll eliminate them. So the leadership will be a criminal they see it as a criminal enterprise to be eliminated. And the young people who have gone in droves into the Oromo Liberation Army, they will be given training and rehabilitation and sent back to their homes because they are misguided kids. So other than that, the OLA, he says, doesn't have even a coherent leadership. The OLA doesn't have a political program, doesn't have that's the kind of attitude he has. And I don't think that has changed. The only reason he made this sudden leap to go to Tanzania was because of international pressure, especially after the Pretoria Agreement. In the process of implementing the Pretoria Agreement, the international partners, mainly the USA, Secretary Blinken, was insistent that he also deals with the Oromo Liberation Army through a peace talk. And settlement has to be achieved there too, was a constant refrain in their interactions with him. There too. Okay, as we make sure that the Pretoria Agreement is implemented in full, there too, in Oromia too, you have to. So basically, it is the international pressure because of the economic sanctions have to be relaxed and so on and so forth. Loans and development aids and these things have to come through. And of course, he has huge lack of foreign currency, and he really depends on the West for that. And the Chinese have also been not as helpful as they thought, because he was, at first, when he was warming up to the United States, he had kind of distanced himself from them. And now it was very difficult for them because they also see that his government is shaky now. They weren't that sure that he is a good partner to work with. But he is always using China and Russia as a way of disciplining the United States, meaning he turns that way in order to make them get more interested in him. But this is their pressure that forced him to go there. Secondly, he has had these rounds of operation against the Oromo Liberation Army, in which he always said this is the final one. This is the final operation. We are going to eliminate them in 3 weeks, in 6 weeks, in 2 weeks, etc. And they have failed spectacularly. The reason they have failed is because they, it is a guerrilla fight. It's not a settled, regimented kind of confrontation. There are some free territories, especially in the south of Oromia and in the west, but generally they are not busy occupying a town or an area and holding it, because they don't want to administer a small town that is free from Prosperity Party. Because as long as the Prosperity Party is still alive in Arat Kilo, which is the center, whatever region they occupy it means nothing. It's only until a reinforcement comes and fights them back. So that's why for the last 2 years, the operation, the name of the operation of the Oromo Liberation Army is Operation Imala Finfinne. It's Operation taking over Finfinne, taking over Addis Ababa. So it's the end point is basically taking over the capital city. Now, if that is the case, they don't cling on to one specific territory. And this has really frustrated them. And recently, he was planning to shell a whole series of towns in the Guji zone, which has been long freed by the Oromo Liberation Army. And the army was confused. They said, well, what do we shell? I mean, there's no, no depot, no training camp, no designated area of their concentration. What do we shell? And shell down the city, the towns. It's the towns. And they weren't so confident about that, so it didn't take place. But it might in the coming weeks. So the whole preparation was basically to eliminate them. Now, when he said he's going to go into negotiations with them in Tanzania, apart from satisfying the international community's demand, the American demand, basically, apart from that, he was also taking a calculated risk. But he was thinking that the OLA will not show up. And even if they show up, they wouldn't accept our conditions. And when they say we will not accept and leave, then we have done everything we can in the eyes of the international community. Now we turn to our military operation. And so the army was on standby. Okay. What happened in Tanzania was that the OLA actually designated its delegates from within the OLA and outside, and they showed up. And they showed up and very much committed to the peace plan. I mean, they had a whole agenda for peace. They have the whole program of peace to work with him. And they were a little surprised. They were taken off guard, the negotiators, Gideon and the rest. And they were just in the motion for a while because they were all indecisive. And they had decided that they deal with agendas one by one. So the Ethiopian government has one agenda. They will discuss that and settle that first. And then it will be the turn of the Oromo Liberation Army to set up another agenda. And they will discuss that and settle on that one, and so on. That was the procedure they have agreed upon, the code of conduct as well. And they had about 4 or 5 from each items were discussed. And when they don't agree upon those items, they just shelf them. They say, okay, let's postpone this and let's move on to. What happened along the way was the Tanzania was basically a process design meeting to design the process. Who will be the guarantors? Who will be the verifiers? Where do we do the negotiation? Who will be the mediators? Where is the venue? What are the procedures? And so on and so forth. What happened there was because they couldn't agree even on the procedural matters. They said, let's shelf this and let's go on to substantive agenda. And so they started talking, among other things, and this makes me laugh really, fiscal federalism. Meaning the taxing, the sharing of taxing power, revenue power within the federation between Oromia and the federal government, etc. So how come we got there? And I was asked to clarify the constitutional issues around there. I said, how come you got there? You haven't even settled this procedural matters. I said, well, we didn't want to have one sticky point and stay there and stop the negotiation because of that. So we were trying to test the waters, trying to go how far we can go. And that was made possible because of the complete commitment on the part of the OLA delegates to make sure that this is resolved amicably. And that was a strategic game they were playing also. They said this might fail. And in fact, they said, we're sure that this will fail, but it will not be because of us. So that was how it went. And I'm not going to disclose some of the issues that they agreed upon and the issues that they haven't agreed upon. In short, one should say, as their common declaration said, as you have seen, it was one text written by different entities. It's basically one text when you read the statements they issued both. And I know who wrote that. So what they said is the negotiation shall continue. We actually have agreed on nothing, but it was good to talk. It clarifies where we stand. And next time, we'll do a little more on the substantive issues. So let's just say this was good, but there are things that we didn't agree upon, and let's meet again. They went on for about 7 days, so I don't think they were interested to go on for more than that. But mainly the reason this couldn't be materialized is they couldn't agree on the mediators, the verifiers, and that was the procedural hurdle, the mediators, the verifiers, and the guarantors. The OLA wants the European Union and the USA to be the guarantors because they have got leverage on the Ethiopian government. And the Ethiopian government doesn't want that at all. They want the AU, the IGAD, and some such, and possibly China, or Turkey and so on, and that was basically what. And they didn't come. The government delegates didn't come with a resolved idea of who they want there. So they were kind of vacillating between Arakilo and them. And these ones were very clear. And they said, we want guarantors that have leverage on the Ethiopian government. And those are the United States and the European Union. From my conversation with the delegates in Tanzania, I was asking during the third day, I said, have you agreed on the guarantors? I said, no. And who is chairing the mediation now anyway? At the moment, we don't have mediators. It's not mediators as such, but there are people who are between us. Who are they? Norway and Kenya. And so I said, no, United States. The US will join sometime later. And the US didn't join. So that's why it's basically the procedural matter that. So they were, however, in spite of that, they put that aside, and they were going through all the other issues that each of them, especially the Oromo Liberation Army, and they said any and every Oromo demands will be put on the table, and we are going to discuss them honorably. And we're not going to back off any of the demands. And in particular, those demands mean the demands of the Oromo protest movement, basically the demands for social justice under the constitution. And secondly, the Oromo people's historic aspiration for national self-determination, which is also easy to do for the government in their view through the constitutional process. The one thing they might demand is let's have an institutional and procedural structure for the referendum. We don't have an Ethiopia, as you know. We don't have a referendum commission. We don't have a referendum act, not even on ad hoc basis, let alone permanent basis. So maybe this will come out later as they discuss. But Abiy Ahmed obviously will not accept this kind of discussion. And thirdly, they had all sorts of demands in relation to, again, including resource and revenue sharing in the federation, if we are going to stay in the federation, and so on and so forth. So there are a number of, and within the framework of the demands of the Oromo protest movement for social justice, you have issue of land, you have the issue of borders, you have the issue of language, you have the issue of self-governance, and so on and so forth. So linguistic justice, meaning the Afan Oromo to make Afan Oromo the federal working language alongside Amharic and possibly other languages as well. So one of the things that also was a cause of discord between them was Ethiopia came thinking that the OLA issue is a regional issue. It will be, most of the substance is going to be sorted out with Shimelis Abdisa's government, not Abiy's, because Abiy is above that, it's federal. And the OLA thinks that nothing really comes to success in the eyes of the Oromo nation and the OLA unless Ethiopia is engaged. This is an Ethiopia issue. This is not a regional issue. And we're not fighting against the regional government. It is the Ethiopian government that's fighting us. And we want a resolution with Ethiopia. And we want this resolution to extend and include all Ethiopians. And one of the sticky points was about the transitional government, because they think that as long as Abiy's regime is in power, things won't be resolved. So what they want is an all-inclusive transitional regime, okay, in which the OLA is also represented, but all other political forces are represented. And Gideon Timotheus's version, or Red One's version of that, would be a transitional government composed of all Oromo parties in Oromia. So like a transitional government in Tigray after Pretoria, a transitional government in Oromia. And for them, this is completely unpalatable. This is relegation of the Oromo issue to local level is simply a way of not wanting to deal with it. And in fact, Abiy tends to forget that his party is also, his particular specific party is the Oromo Prosperity Party. So it is in Oromia, and the leading regime is also coming from Oromia, and its constituency is Oromia. And we will be part of the coalition of transitional government in the region, but not in Ethiopia, because yours is a regional matter. Now that will never be something that I would really find a breakthrough about, but I think those are some of, I'm just giving you the feel and flavor of some of the issues that were raised and that were, talked about. And is there any hope for the future? Well, if there is a good phase negotiation, you have to first believe that peace is in your interest. My problem is Abiy Ahmed is not interested in peace as a non-negotiable good. No, he doesn't. Secondly, he also wants to cling to power. For example, when he talks about transitional government in Oromia, even in Oromia, he says, come in, disarm, and open your offices in Oromia, and prepare for the next election. Until that election happens, I remain to be in power because I am democratically elected, and you have to respect the democratic votes of the people. So that sounds like everything is going well in his realm. So that they can't take. And I think that obviously tells you that Abiy wants the status quo as far as Oromia is concerned, and the rest he changed through military operations. Otherwise, he doesn't want any peace in Oromia. He thinks he can contain some of the restive areas. For example, Wallagga, he wants to characterize the whole problem as a Wallagga issue. So he wants to militarily conquer it and then create a transitional government in Wallagga and make it a region unto itself so that it can be contained there. And by the way, they have nominated, that Abiy has designated the governor of Wallagga, the new regional state already. And where is the constitution in all this? Who cares about the constitution? All right. So, and recently the other plan is, to break up Oromia into 5 more regions, and all the rules about Amhara region and so on and so forth was basically to divert attention in Oromia from what is going to come. And these were the things, Abiy does things by surprise. When he does this and suddenly you don't expect this, and then that happens and so on and so forth. So he was basically, he had a lot in the tank at this point in time to overwhelm by surprises, to overwhelm the Oromia region. So is he a peace partner? No. So what is the end game? How do we get out of this? If he were an honest peace partner, if he were negotiating bonus ide, it is possible. It is easy because it's easy to resolve because everything is within the constitutional frame. It's very simple. But if we go through the constitutional frame, then he will lose his power, and he doesn't want to. And if he loses his power, it means he loses it before he undoes the constitution. And that was his mission from the very start. And these wars are conducted in defense of the constitution and the constitutional rights. Now, everyone knows that the constitution has been trampled upon, but everybody knows that that is the only language that can take us forward. That's the only, common language with which we can order the Ethiopian political landscape. And the only group that is against it is the Ethio-Amhara elite, now concentrated in the Amhara region. So he thinks Abiy's confrontation with the Amhara special forces, etc., is a temporary thing. He thought as soon as he breaks up Oromia into 5 regions, the entire Amhara elite that is now in disaffection with him will come back to line and will come around to side with him. Because at the end of the day, as long as he is going to undo the federal setup, then that's their project, and he continues to be a hero. So he's moving in this area. So yeah, well, let's move on to other questions and conclude. Sorry.
No, just off the back of what you mentioned about one of the demands from OLA being about the transitional government, the need for a transitional government. That kind of ties into the process of justice and accountability, doesn't it? Because without actually having, we've seen so much challenges when it comes to justice and accountability, because again, this is a question that keeps being asked in many rooms, but somehow it's the elephant in the room that never has an answer, is how can the perpetrator possibly be the one to deliver justice and accountability? And the transitional government can come into this because with a restructuring of the government, there can be a level of transparency and accountability and a level of being able to move forward, right? So my question to you is, in terms of justice and accountability, so far, the peace agreements have actually given away, Pretoria being the first successful peace agreement, but even if there is an OLA peace agreement, the Pretoria peace agreement has clearly shown that the government has delegated justice and accountability to a domestic framework that allowed the government to actually be almost the brokers of the ones that are actually facilitating justice and accountability, ironically, them being actually the leading perpetrators. So are the peace agreements actually giving way for the perpetrators for the perpetrators of so many crimes, especially the genocidal crimes committed both in Oromia and in Tigray? how are they able to be the ones to lead the country forward when they are the perpetrators, effectively with no transitional government?
Fantastic. This is a very good question. And I forgot to mention that one of the sticky points within the negotiation, the last peace talk in Tanzania, in Zanzibar, was the transitional justice issue, the issue of accountability for acts of ethnic cleansing, acts of mass atrocity crimes, like setting fire on a whole village and burning people alive within their huts, rape of children and women, and extrajudicial assassinations, with a spectacle of killing, in towns and so on and so forth. There were many claims for justice, many demands for justice. And one of the things the OLA put forward was to have a neutral, impartial, possibly international investigation to all these allegations, because at least some of them have been reported in Amnesty's and Human Rights Watch reports. And those are only from specific waradas and specific areas, and the reports say as much. And there is a widespread pattern, but that was drawn from a particular area. Given the fact that this is widespread, and given the fact that there is massive extrajudicial detention, extrajudicial arrest and killing, political assassinations, weaponization of rape of children and women, and burning down of harvests, and using arson as an instrument of subjugation, and all sorts of destruction of infrastructure and destruction of farms and looting, and then some activities clearly an act of ethnic cleansing. And this has been declared openly in the Oromia parliament, in Chafe Oromia, where they said in order to catch the fish, you have to drain the ocean, and all those things. Given the fact that these mass and of course close to 1 million people are displaced in Wolaga alone, about 800,000 as we speak, and through JIRA, I have been trying to make my bit of contribution through humanitarian aid in different places. Even just yesterday, we signed some amounts of money to go for legal defense for young people who were abducted from Dambidolo and accused of abducting the university students, the women that were said to be abducted. And the Ethiopian government in parliament, Abiy Ahmed himself, says that there was no abduction and there was no evidence. These young people were arrested from their homes and they have been incommunicado, under arrest, in detention for the last 3 years. And they had no lawyer. And finally, this past week, they were sentenced to 15 years of imprisonment in the absence of any evidence. In fact, if you read the case, the decision itself says, although there isn't a substantive evidence that proves that these people have committed it, given the fact that the offense is very, very grave, there is no evidence, but because this is of a national importance, because of the gravity, they have to be sentenced to this and this. And so we were supposed to find them a lawyer to take the case to the cassation division, because it is a fundamental error of law, both in weighing evidence and in terms of deciding on the conviction and the sentences. And so we have been doing all sorts of things. And these young people had no clothes on them. They were completely, it was a very sad thing to see. And they never had anyone visit them. So some of my delegation went there to visit them. It was like they have come alive again. And they couldn't believe their ears that they have a lawyer who have submitted since now. I think I just received the application for the cassation division. And these are the kind of things that we deal with every day. In Karayu, in Wollo, in Borana, apart from the famine that was, by the way, government created starvation. through two major ways. One, they burn the harvest. In pastoralist areas, they block the population from moving around because pastoralists survive, because they live in a constantly fragile ecology. They know how to deal with drought when it comes. But because they move around, that's why they are pastoralists. They look at the green pasture land and they move, depending on where the weather is good and where it is not. Now, what happened through the last 4 years of Abiy's rule or misrule is that he blocks movement of the pastoralists because he thinks that those are districts in which OLA operates. So when people move even to the market area to sell their cattle, they stop them and they say, you are supporters of OLA. And so they take the cattle and they arrest the people. And their whereabouts are not known. Result is people didn't move, didn't sell their cattle, didn't graze, and the drought is there and famine. And that's number one. They use the ecological fragility against the people by blocking their movement. The second is they destroy harvests wherever there is farmland. They set it on fire. And when drought comes, it becomes all the more precarious. And now they have nothing. And one of the things that we do through JIRA, for example, is to buy them tents from across the border, from Kenya. We buy them tents so that they can create a semblance of a house to live in. And this is the whole 7 districts in Guji zone, for example. 7 waradas, 7 districts, and many other places in Karayu, in Borana, in Wollo. The Wollo people basically are living in caves now. There have been an onslaught of attacks by the Fano and Amhara Special Forces. And remember, Wollo is an Oromo special zone within Amhara region. And they literally live in caves. Every year during the month of Ramadan, the Amhara regional government, through its special forces, the police, the militia, the Fano, they make an invasion. And those are, the Wollo people are generally traditionally armed and they know how to fight. And they have been there for 300 or 400 years and they know how to take their defense. And so they run to their caves. But the land is burned down, the shops are destroyed. And the sad thing about the Wollo is they're under siege. If they want to go to Finfinne, for example, for medication, they have to go through Debra Brahan, which is an Amhara stronghold. They can't. Or they have to go to Dese, which is the capital city of the Wollo area, which is again part of the Amhara region. They can't go there. What happens? Even the wounded, the injured are dying because of lack of medication. So one of the things that we do through JIRA is to send them money to find ways to take the sick and the injured to Afar region, and you pay 100,000 Ethiopian birr for one person. And then from Afar, you take them to Adama in Oromia, where there is at least some facilities, private health facilities. And so they get treated there. Most of them, they were arrested en route to Adama by the Amhara Special Forces who have penetrated deep into the Oromia region from Minjar, in Metahara, in Walenchiti, etc. area, and they were intercepted and they were killed. From the, they bring them out of the bus and kill them. This is the current situation we live in. And just before I came here, I had to ask you to postpone our meeting for 1 more hour because I was chairing a meeting in JIRA about the new kind of intervention we have to make in some areas. It's nothing that we do compared to the immensity of the problem we have. 800,000 people in Wulaga, in Kiramu Horogduru alone. And then you've got all the people under famine attack, under famine, under all sorts of problems in Wollo, in Borana, in Guji, in Gendeberet, which have, their houses are burned. This is the new fashion now, the new way of doing war. It's like you set fire on the whole village. And people, if they survive, they have no houses. And they don't know where to go. What do? We buy them some tents. And the day they realize that they have symptoms, they go and kill them again. And this is the situation we live in. So one of the things the OLA has to put on the table was the issue of justice and accountability, the issue of, first, an impartial, neutral investigation. In fact, an internationally sanctioned investigation. And second, a proper prosecution and trial, and complete legal accountability. But that's not enough. Apart from legal accountability, they wanted political accountability, meaning political officials under whose watch these things have happened have to be removed from office, have to resign, or in some ways they have to go out of the picture. That's political accountability. You pay the price of the crimes you perpetrated by relinquishing the power that you have. Okay, and thirdly, through challenging, and this is a comprehensive program of transitional justice now that they have been tabling, challenging the national conscience. Because as for me, beginning from 2020, we don't appeal to the Ethiopian government's conscience because Ethiopia doesn't have a conscience. And that's why we're forced into an armed struggle, all right? And when a nation fails to resolve its political issues and tries to resolve it through arms, then the national conscience is dead. And I don't believe the Ethiopian government, the Ethiopian regime, and even as a population, we have what one can call a national soul, a national conscience. Had it not been so, we wouldn't be silent in the face of genocide. And we were. In fact, we were supportive most of the times. And this has to be, so we have to find a way to come to a shared, united condemnation of the evil that we lived through. And as a nation, we need to come to a point of remorse, recognition of what we just did, and memorializing it, and talking about not doing it again. And which means we need to do social demilitarization, we need to challenge the national conscience, we need to have a shared and common understanding of what evil this is, and we have to legislate against this kind of activity. And we need to ban through political accountability. One of the things that we do is legislatively outlaw this kind of organization, fascistic organizations, outlaw them. This kind of organizations shouldn't benefit from freedom of association, for example. Okay, so the third scheme of transitional justice, in our view, was the need for a truth and reconciliation framework where truth has to be established, because there are not just perpetrators and victims. There are a host of people involved in this as beneficiaries of genocide, as bystanders of genocide. There needs to be a moral accountability, and a moral accountability comes through the challenging of the conscience of the nation. And that can happen only through a very elaborate truth commission, and from there on, by institutionally foreclosing the possibility of this kind of things happening in that country again, and through finding a legal solution to our differences. And the Constitution is quite a wonderful framework for that. This is the way to go. And one of the things that the Ethiopian government didn't even want to discuss is the transitional justice with Ola, the transitional justice issue. And yes, legal accountability, of course. And we said no, even domestically, the courts, okay, the judicial institutions, the human rights institutions, other constitutional institutions, such as the electoral board, they are all either complicit or indifferent to all the crimes that were happening in that country. And they cannot be the judge, they cannot be the investigators. So that's why we have an international component in the person of the ICC for investigation, an international component in the form of ICJ or other judges who have presided over other truth commissions or inquiry commissions in Palestine, in Ararssa, which is the Nagorno-Karabakh Armenian issue. There were judges that looked into fact-finding missions. Judges, very honorable judges who have been into fact-finding missions in Ireland, in Palestine, in South Africa, in Azerbaijan, in different other places, from the European Union, from the ICJ, or from other places, a commission of international jurists, okay, who will be hybridly sitting with probably Ethiopian judges, if not entirely, if it can't be international. Part of the reason why it can't be international is because the Ethiopian government hasn't signed the ICC, therefore the Rome Statute, therefore ICC doesn't have a jurisdiction. Oh no. And because this crime, particularly the ones that were committed in Tigray, have an international component. Transnational forces have involved. Eritrea is one, the United Arab Emirates, the Russian technicians, the trainers of the Chinese, signal experts of China, drone signal experts from China, and so on and so forth. A host of people have been involved. The drone assembly groups from Turkey and Iran and all sorts of people. Given the fact that there was an international element in the commission of the crime, given the fact that there is an international set of crimes that were committed, the international jurisdiction has to be there somehow. And because Ethiopia as a nation, institutionally, in all its forms, have been involved in the perpetration of the crime, because it has lost the moral standing. And this is why we talk about moral responsibility as well, in addition to legal, political, etc. We need a moral accountability. And given this, at least if we can't take it to an international venue, we have to create a hybrid venue within Ethiopia with international personnel so that some kind of justice is achieved there. Now that will at least make the victims feel relief, feel vindicated. And it's a good thing for confidence building to live together in the future in a peaceful, at least in a comparatively peaceful manner. And this were the state of things that the OLA wanted to table, and the government gives a short reference, lip service to accountability, but they don't want to go into the bones and the flesh and bones of those, and they didn't even get to discuss these things. Now, generally, yes, you said peace accord before defeating the perpetrator. Peace accord, even after dislodging the perpetrator, even after prevailing over Abiy, for example, after deposing him. A transitional justice even that happens even then, like the Nuremberg style, Tokyo style, Arusha, the Rwanda style, or the Hague style in post Yugoslavia. Okay, even those are dystopic by nature. And the Eichmann style in Jerusalem, Adolf Eichmann's trial in 1960-62. They are dystopic because, and the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission process, he was dystopic because, you see, you can never repair the damage. Plus, by definition, this process of accountability, whether it is judicial or Truth Commission, etc., is very selective. It doesn't address all. Then that will be restricted by evidentiary rules. Okay? Then, basically what it means is the perpetrators are treated more justly than they deserve. And so the victims will feel like, oh, so any transitional justice process ends up in an anticlimactic moment. It goes and ends up becoming anticlimactic. At the end, the victims, everybody will say, there is some void still. Is this all? Is the thing. But when the perpetrator is still in power, and this is the thing, the Pretoria Agreement was an agreement that actually preserved and conserved the power of Abiy Ahmed above all things. So it legitimated him Arusha legitimated him now in relation to Oromia. It legitimated, at least it gave a recognition that it has to continue. The thing we were told when when the TDF was around Debre Brahan, Debre Sina, from the international community was, and we, by we I mean the OLA and the TDF, because I was closely working with them. I sometimes tend, the nature of lawyers, you know, when you stand for the defending someone, you say, my client or me. So that's the way you speak. You identify yourself with your client. And so the OLA, one of the things we were told was, you have to respect, you have to guarantee that you respect the territorial integrity of Ethiopia and the continuity of the state, by which they mean the continuity of the power of Abiy's regime. And we think that's the result of the political dynamics internally. And as long as we subscribe to the idea of democracy and so on, then he has to be amenable to that, and accountability must take care of the crime, and so on and so forth. But they say, no, he somehow, because if he's gone, then there is a power vacuum and we can't take risk. Okay, so what happened in Pretoria was his power was preserved, prolonged, so it got more renewed durability. He was given a new lease on life, really. And not just that, his action as a government was legitimated and legitimized. And so it was always in his advantage to be dealing with, you know, the rebel forces, as the international media would like to say, to deal with them in peace talks. He likes it. He comes to the limelight, but in fact, he gets legitimacy for his power. Now, this legitimated the illegitimate. The criminal became acceptable partner of peace. And in fact, he dictates the peace. Because if the criminal doesn't accept the terms of the transitional arrangement, the transitional peace justice process, then he can get away with it. Because he is the one that has to accept it. And he is going to administer it through his own institutions. But, and so on, whichever way you take it, the winner is the criminal, the perpetrator. And this is one of the reasons I was saying from the very start, although peace is our strategic goal, the OLA, by negotiating with Abiy Ahmed, is basically becoming a complicit, a partner in the entire crime, and justice is going to be buried underneath the peace talks. And this is exactly the thing that Getachew Redda was saying when he was talking with you, Melat, in the webinar that you organized, when he said, we want justice by all means, and peace cannot be sustainable without justice, but we do not want justice to get in the way of peace. That was very sad for me to hear, you know, especially coming from Getachew Redda, who was famous or infamous for saying, we will settle the accounts, remember? When it comes from him, that was very sad for me. It was an ironic moment, really, because even he was saying, we want justice, but we don't want justice to come to disrupt the peace process, because the peace is fragile and so on and so forth. And that was already the beginning of the dystopia with regard to justice in Tigray. And that same thing is going to happen even in a worse manner to Oromos if the transitional justice thing isn't properly taken care of. And this is one of the reasons why in Solidarity of Nations, we actually brought the idea of transitional justice as a rallying point. We brought it to be one of the things that we have to do. We have to bring to the front and to the center and work on, so that we can actually contribute to the process, probably even guide the process and make it plausibly. Obviously, when you are dealing with the criminal himself as a partner for justice, it is already a flawed thing, but at least go some level, some length in addressing at least some of the issues, so that at least as a nation, we get challenged about what this is about. And we try to realize somehow that this was wrong. At least some people are caught. Some people are, some acts are named for what they are, for the evil that they are. Some people are named and shamed for what they have done. And some people are brought to trial and were demanded, challenged to face the inconvenience of defending themselves. At least that has to be done. That somehow you can't do these kinds of things and get away with it, and that has to be pronounced, and that should be pronounced in the transitional justice process. Now, I didn't answer the issue of whether it has to remain insular, it has to remain Ethiopian or international. I know there is a challenge, some jurisdictional issues related to the international process, but I think we need to push, as activists in particular, we need to push for a double-pronged, pursuit of justice. Because as I said, because some of the crimes are international, crimes in international law, because some of the crimes are committed through international actors, somehow the international community will have jurisdiction in different ways. And of course, individually persecuting the individuals who have committed crime, as long as we have documented and archived the evidence, we can do so whenever they go outside of Ethiopia. But the process, the pressure, the diplomatic pressure, the advocacy must continue. Justice for Tigray, justice for Oromia, justice for victims of authoritarian repression under Abiy Ahmed must be put forward again and again to the international community. And we have to make sure that the domestic institutional setup is not enough, is incapable, is implicated. And so we need to find another way. So of course, if Abiy settles even for the domestic one, we need to push for more transparency and include some international component in it, because the national has been compromised. And then while that is going on, we need to have an international wing of the transitional justice process, because it is a crime against humanity, ethnic cleansing, genocide, and war crimes that were committed. And these have to be dealt with in international tribunals, or at least in human rights institutions outside of Ethiopia. For example, the African Human and People's Charter, Human and People's Rights Charter, and the African Commission have to take jurisdiction on this. We are not a signatory to the protocol on the African Court of Human Rights, but if we were, at least we could have also gone there. But apart from that, we can, wherever they go, in all different countries, the Western countries, when there is a human rights violation of the grossest type of this type, we need to find ways of making them accountable wherever they go, because the persons who have committed this, who have spearheaded this, who have masterminded this, who have participated in different ways are known. We've been documenting this. This is the era of social media. We've been documenting it, and they were not ashamed of doing what they were doing and saying what they were saying. And these people must be accountable, and there should be a continued momentum for advocacy in the international realm for an international justice and accountability for the crimes perpetrated in Tigray, in Oromia, and in other places in Ethiopia. Otherwise, this regime is getting away with it, and the victims are going to feel the dystopia sooner than later.
Thank you so much. I wish there's so many more questions that we both would have wanted to ask you. There's so many more, and hopefully we can have you back another time and we can ask you those questions, because again, like a never-ending pool of wisdom you have there. So I think we'll just finish up today's program here. But that's not to say that we will not. We would definitely want you back to discuss some more, and hopefully we can do that at a later time. And I think it's very important. I think especially the conclusive statements you were making about the justice and accountability, the fact that we should not settle for what we have been given simply because of simply because we have no choice at this point. There's so much more to justice and accountability that can be pursued later on in time, but also simultaneously with the domestic mechanisms also being used. The international mechanisms can be incorporated into the domestic mechanisms. So the fight for justice and accountability is not yet over, and people should not deem it to be over. So I think it's a very important takeaway, I think. So thank you so much, Dr. Tsegaye. So we really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on here. I know it's the middle of the night over there. We appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And I'm sure some of the issues must be discussed in more details in some other times, at some other point. And I hope to come back again and to hammer them out specifically, and particularly the ones on transitional justice. I never felt I said enough. And we are launching a new campaign within the Solidarity of Nations to write and publish different papers on that and issue a policy paper, a statement, and so on and so forth. I think the momentum to advocate for justice is absolutely necessary, and it shouldn't relent, it shouldn't relax. And having recognition in the international community for genocide and for mass atrocity crimes is an intergenerational work. It's not just for one generation. Sometimes, the Armenian genocide from 1915 up until 2021, it wasn't recognized. And the generations and generations and generations after generations of Armenians have been always advocating for this. And finally, they seem to get traction. Unfortunately, there is another Armenian group, about 1 million, living in Azerbaijan, who are now, destined for extermination in Azerbaijan and in Nagorno-Karabakh. And they were also still there, and Armenians are still campaigning for that as well. And the work of seeking transitional justice for atrocities is not a one-time thing. It's something that even takes a cross-generational and intergenerational campaign. And we should not relent on this. We should keep pushing for that kind of justice. Now, this work is not necessarily for the punishment of the perpetrator. This work is to be a witness for the victim. It's a way of remembering the victims. It's a way of telling the story again, remembering them again. Remembering is, I deliberately put the spin on re. It's remembering them again, that they are part of us. Their story is not hidden. They are not forgotten. It's one thing that they were killed unjustly. It's another that their story is buried unfairly. And so through our work of advocacy, we're saying that they are not forgotten. And we are witnessing that happened to them. And if we can't do anything for them, at least we will remember them. And my action in Solidarity of Nations, my activism so far, and many people have been saying, you're not even a Tigrayan. Why do you worry about Tigray? Why do you worry about this Sidama? Why do you worry about Metakel and so on, Kamant and Ago? Because that's my act of witnessing. As an academic, that's my responsibility. As a public intellectual, that's my responsibility. I know it means nothing. It means nothing materially. But for me, it makes me live with my conscience. But for them, it is about remembering them. It is about witnessing. I have seen it, and that was wrong, and I will not forget you, and it will not going to happen on my watch. It's not going to happen again elsewhere. And so because of that importance of this kinds of campaign, we need to reinvigorate that kind of campaign. I think there is a kind of loss of momentum among the Tigrayan diaspora recently after the Pretoria Agreement. Of course, I understand the respite is necessary after 3 years of continuous campaign and not being heard. I understand that, but seems to be somehow dissipating at the moment. We are also turning internal most of the times whenever there is this kind of transition. But I think it is important that we keep that alive, because we lost about 1 million people, and that's not even investigated yet. We don't even know the truth yet, and I assume that there is a flood of writings that will emerge soon, when there is freedom and people have come to have a fresh breath of peace, in the country. So, given that most of the things haven't come out yet, And in fact, there is an ongoing war still, which is only a chapter of the war in Tigray, the war on Tigray. We need to keep pushing, and the same kind of loss of momentum is seen among Oromos, even before that, because of the divisions, as I said, because of the political factions. And I think we need to reanimate that feeling of advocating for justice, and we have to work on that. And I hope to come again and again on your show to highlight some of the important issues. I know I have not addressed some of the questions that you have sent to me through the email. I have been prepared for them, but I think we need some more time for those, and we'll come back again and talk about them. Thank you so much for having me. It has been a special moment. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for having the platform as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the words that you shared with us. And I think it's very important, this remembering aspect of it. It has to have a special place in our heart, and we must continue to remember all the crimes, because even if justice doesn't come the way that we want it to come today, it will come in the future in some form or shape. But thank you so much. Sorry, it's middle of the night for you, so you have a good night. Take care.